I am a computer engineer. My degrees are in theater and art and a minor in music. I'm here to talk about the Multilingual App Toolkit version 3.0. The idea is that it's an extensible toolkit, and I want to give you a high-level understanding of what it means to add service providers into it. We're not going to write a lot of code today. We're not going to write any code. I'll use some that's already been written and step through it in a way that I think will be understandable for the folks in the room. So the session goals, to discuss the role of XLIFF from a developer perspective, to give you an overview of the toolkit itself. We'll call it MAT for short, and to demonstrate a third-party translation service provider integrated into the tools. So first, there's a question: why does the developer care about translation? Okay, let me just answer that here. So everybody's had some charts. I've got some also. So as a developer, when I'm working, and I work in one language, for me it would be ENUS. I have a pretty large market, and it consumes most of my time. But if I add 2 more languages, I capture 52% of the addressable market in a more global perspective. That's a big thing. And so maybe I should be working in more than one language, is the base idea here. Okay? Those would be Chinese and Japanese. Let's go to 5 languages. So we're going to add French and German, and now we're at 60%. So it seems like a reasonable number of languages to those of us who are used to talking in language, but to an individual developer, this is a very formidable thing. And yet, it's compelling to think about the global reach that I could have if I could figure out how to work with languages. 10 languages, 78%. So I want to give you a different perspective. We've heard about having over 200 languages. Microsoft Windows 8.1 shipped in 108 languages, and so there's a lot of reach into a lot of markets. But as an individual developer, I don't have aspirations of shipping in 108 languages. But I might be really excited about shipping in 10. Here's another way to look at it, and that's that not thinking globally, but thinking multilingual, and thinking about multilingual in my own marketplace, which is the United States. If I were to look at San Francisco as a market, and I think about a 25-mile radius from city center, there's some amazing things going on there, that 45% speak a non-English mother language. Okay, so it changes. We think about California as being Spanish or ENUS, but in fact, it's much richer. And the point here is that every metropolitan area is culturally diverse, it's multilingual by nature, and that there's opportunities for developers if we can cross the divide between us and understanding how to add languages to our products, to have better reach, to be more profitable if we're in it for business. And so that's really the thing that I'm thinking about. The developer cares about translation, about localizability for these reasons, because of the reach, if we can get to it. So you've already seen XLIFF at least once today. Some of you may not know what XLIFF is. I want to talk about it just very briefly. It's an OASIS technical committee, a standard for localization data to be carried and transported through automation or however you want to use it. It's a standard that a number of us know how to read and write to, you can see here that OASIS itself is a nonprofit consortium. So we've talked about Unicode, we've talked about W3C. OASIS is another body that drives the development, convergence, and adoption of open standards for the global information society. So very much in tune with what we've all been talking about. The purpose of the XLIFF TC is to define through extensible XML vocabularies and promote the adoption of a specific for interchange of localizable software and document-based objects and metadata. And I highlighted the software and document because many times we think about the content, but I'm thinking about, as a developer, about both. I think about the Chrome that surrounds the content that flows through it, the application strings, UI, and so on. Microsoft is a sponsor and representative on the TC, working on the XLIFF 2.0 standard. We'll hear more about that. I just wanted to share that the Multilingual App Toolkit, or MAT, leverages XLIFF 1.2 when 2.0 is out there. I'm sure that we will be advancing our object model to that standard as well. Okay. And so with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a little demo. And I need to change. There we go. Not so easy to see, huh? So that's Visual Studio 2013, and I'll just give you a close-up of a section here. So what we're going to look at here is where the resources are. So in this particular Windows Phone app, which is a Silverlight app, you can see that we have app resources.resx. Okay. So let me back out for a second. What this says up here is tools, and this is enable the multilingual app toolkit. So as I enable it, what will happen is, we go back in, I'll go one more. You can see that I now have something with a .xlf on the end of it, appresources.qps-ploc.xlf. That's an XLIFF file that we create by default that takes control of those resx files that, as a developer, I only care about the resx. That's my resource files. The ploc means pseudoloc, and what we've done at Microsoft is added a pseudo engine into it so that you could go ahead and use that and get in your language the readable marked up language. I'm not going to demonstrate that today, but I wanted you to see that that was there, that we're starting to take control of things. Instead, what I want to do is I want to add another language. So I'll go ahead and add translation languages. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. Oops, sorry. Let me bring it over to view. Okay. And we'll take German. Okay. Now, if we look over here, we'll see that we now have a de-de.xlf. So we've added another XLIFF file for resources under the resources folder. Okay. We've changed this to the MS build process, so to populate those folders, I have to build the solution, so I'm going to do that now. So initially when they're created, they're empty. Now that I've run the build process, they have the resource strings in them as well. I'm going to go ahead now and open this XLIFF file, and just note that we have included an editor with the toolkit that looks like a lot of other editors. This one's very lightweight. There's not a lot of features to it. You can see that there is a bit of a workflow. I won't zoom in on everything, but this says new, needs to review, translated, final, signed off. There is whether the content is translatable or not, yes or no, so we can lock things. There's a place for comments. What I really would like to do is I'd like to take a look at these resources. So we're in DEDE, and I want to go ahead and I'm just going to take this word, which is add. Okay, maybe I can zoom in a little bit for you. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click this suggest button. You notice before I click on it that there's a logo, an icon right here. That icon is the icon of a translation service provider that's in the pole position, the first position of an extensible model of providers that we use. So in this case, I've got 3 providers. I've got this one, and I have the language portal API set, which is from our language excellence group that owns our terminology and translation memories, and I have Microsoft Translator API as well. And you'll see those three icons. I'll show you those in a minute and how they show up for fallback. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and run this. And let me just zoom out a little bit. And so we can see that there's a number of results for this suggest that I asked for. And when we're looking at those, as we're zooming back in just a touch, we'll see that we've got a variety of them here. And if we look over, we can see where they came from. So you can see that we've got the translation workspace sample provider that Lionbridge built for me this last week, so we could demonstrate how a third-party professional translation provider could plug into the toolkit. You can see that they provided this number of 100% matches, and then we have the Microsoft Language Portal provider, which also had a 100% match, but it was in second position, so it showed up after that. And then the Microsoft Translator provider, which is the machine translation, coming in after that. Okay, does that kind of make sense? So knowing that I need to translate this thing, I believe I'm going to trust my number one provider, and I'm just going to say translate all. And it'll go through that, and if we have enough Wi-Fi bandwidth, it'll go through at a reasonable time frame. Not bad. Almost there. Okay, we'll save that. Getting back to here, what I wanted to show you is that I have an application. Actually, I have it running on this device as well. And it's a small phone app that I created with a buddy of mine that takes a look at the Language Portal API. And so we just surfaced what was coming from there. And you can see now that it's been translated into German by that action. So I picked it up and translated it for us right away. And what it does is it allows us to go ahead and pick the language that we want to use as our source language. You can see we've got several loaded in. We'll just say US.
And Charles cringes.
Just for Charles. And then we will choose German. So the word is swipe, and we all use swipe as a gesture, and it is a term. And so I'll go ahead and ask for that to come back as a service, and you can see I have the terminology that's coming from our terminology portal from Microsoft right there at my fingertips. So it's a cute little app that we use just to test ourselves. I guess the key thing, though, is if you were an app developer and you had a phone app or a mobile app of some sort, you saw it didn't take me too many clicks with a relationship with a trusted provider to have my app translated in German. This is a key point. And so in looking at that, I really don't need to go much further on that topic or make it much more difficult, but what I do want to do is I want to go ahead and show you just how simple it is. Okay, so if we take a look right here, you can see that there's a name. So here's the translation provider list. And it's the order that you see of fallback. We've set it up so it's just the order of appearance in this XML file. So it's a very, very simple structure that you'd add into if you wanted to create your own service provider or get somebody else's. So you could use any translation provider that you go ahead and install their DLLs, and life would be good. We've got links to how you do that. So you can see that I set the translation workspace provider as my top level, and then following that, the language portal provider, and then following that, the Microsoft translation provider. Could comment them out, could add them, could mix them around. It really depends upon my trust relationship with that translation entity, and whether or not I want to take everything from them, whether I'm looking for suggestions. My sophistication. One of the things that I want to note about this while we're looking at this, let me back out of that, is that the translation providers themselves have confidence levels that come from them. So if the Language Portal API says that it's got 100% confidence in something, that's a number that comes from there. The Translation Workspace confidence level is one that Lionbridge owns. The Microsoft Translator confidence level is one that the Microsoft Translator, Bing Translator people own. And that there's opportunities, I think, across providers to come up with a common way of describing confidence, or a better way, or something. But until now, when you look at it, I think you need to understand a bit about it as a consumer. And so for a developer, from my experience, what I'm really looking for is assurance from that post-edit translation source. So if we're using machine translation or TMs, recycling, all of those kinds of things that I have in the tool set, when I hand stuff off or I get something from my translation provider, what I'm really doing is I'm paying at that point for the quality assurance that I just know that it's going to be good and I don't have to think about it. Okay? So I think that's mostly it for the toolkit demo. The other thing I wanted to do is I'll give you some resources, so these slides will be available as well afterwards. The Bing Translator Control, the Microsoft Translator API, these are two different things. Recently, Chris Vent and I presented at the Microsoft Developer Conference Build in San Francisco, where we demonstrated a different app, but showing how the translator control can be embedded in an application and then handle translation in the flow, and then using the translator API embedded in MAT, I was able to then take that same app and provide translated strings. So it was kind of an end-to-end scenario that looked pretty good. Here's the Microsoft Translator on MSDN, where you get started guides, code samples, and customization tools. The Multilingual App Toolkit itself is free. It runs in every SKU of Visual Studio, including the Express SKUs. The Microsoft Translator API, which has a limit of a couple of million words per month, translation outside of the toolkit. Inside of MAT, there are no limits. You can use it completely unlimited. And then the third-party translation provider sample, I mentioned that you could learn how to do that if you want to go deep. If you click on that link, you can see a sample provider that we created using the Taos API initially to demonstrate that. And that would be a good place to go deep on it if you really wanted to go there. And then finally, here's the OASIS XLIFF 2.0 standard. That's a new specification that is almost out. I'm looking forward to seeing it finally published. One other thing that I didn't show in the Multilingual App Toolkit is that while you saw the workflow, you saw that I could click on an XLIFF file and open up an editor. In fact, all I had to do is right-click on the solution and say, build my files, and you get the same translation services from within the IDE. So if you know what you're doing and you trust your provider, you don't need to shell out to that external editor at all. You can just stay within the IDE, which is important to developers. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Dan.